Welcome back to the Leeds Rhinos Podcast, episode 65. Whilst the players are earning a well-enjoyed rest, we're still here with the podcast content, so make sure that you subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. Remember to click that notification bell so that you know as soon as new podcast content drops. Keep up to date with all things here at AMT Heading. We've got lots of great content coming on during the off-season, so don't miss out on any of that. Remember to give us a 5-star review. It always helps with the podcast charts to keep us spreading the word about all things Leeds Rhinos and Rugby League to the widest possible audience. Thank you for everyone who's joined us this year. We've really enjoyed bringing this content to you, and we look to continue to do so during the off-season. Obviously, we've got a massive game coming up a week on Saturday when we've got the third Ashes test here. The Kangaroos are in town against England, so a sellout AMT Heading. It's going to be a really special occasion, so look out for that one as well. I'm delighted to be joined, a very special edition of the Leeds Rhinos podcast today by our Chief Executive, at least for another few hours, Gary Hetherington, and we're going to reflect on an incredible 29 years at the helm for Gary on this, his final day as Leeds Rhinos Chief Executive. Gary, first of all, welcome back onto the podcast, your third appearance. You get to keep the match ball today. You've been doing a lot of reflecting over the last couple of months, lots of events and things like that. Has it been nice to have a chance to look back and reminisce?
It is. It's always good to look back, isn't it? And I've had so many good memories, made so many friends, and it's been a wonderful journey. So yes, it's a time to reflect and to look back on what's been quite a fascinating journey.
If we can go right back to the start in terms of how, obviously, you were a player at Leeds, you then became an owner and operated a club at Sheffield Eagles, so you were an opponent of Leeds as well. Your involvement in coming to rescue Headingley and the Leeds Rugby League Club back in 1996 started a little bit earlier than when you were originally announced. Just tell us that story.
It does. Yeah, we'd done pretty well at Sheffield Eagles. I think we came 5th in the centenary season, and it needed significant investment to actually take us to the next level. I didn't have that investment, but my wife was president of the RFL at the time, and we went to a game in Scotland. I think it was in Glasgow. And afterwards, we came back to the hotel, and there was effectively an RFL board meeting taking place. And one of the topics on the agenda was Leeds, the survival of Leeds and Leeds Rugby League Club. And I chatted to Maurice Lynch, and he said, just inadvertently, don't you fancy having a go at that job? And I said, yeah, it's the sort of thing I could get my teeth into, is that, Maurice? Didn't think any more of anything else about it. And about 2 days later, I got a phone call from Dennis Greenwood. Maurice had obviously spoken to Dennis. Dennis was the chairman of Leeds CFNA, asking me of my interest. And I said, well, I have an interest, Dennis. So I met the Leeds CFNA board several times just very privately. And of course, things progressed, and I wasn't to know that they had also been contacting Paul Caddick. Paul had helped the Leeds Rugby Union Club secure a 5-year deal to come and play at Headingley. And Sir Noel Stockdale was a friend and a shooting partner of Paul. They tried to tempt him to get involved as well. And it was Alf Davis who phoned me up. He said, look, I think we could have a good partnership with you and somebody else. And I said, well, who is it, Alf? He said, I can't tell you. It's a secret. I said, well, Alf, I need to know. He said, I think you'll know him as well. Anyway, me and Paul came together. I remember myself and my wife Kath having a final meeting in his house. He says, "Can you make it work?" I said, "Look, I've had a real good look at it. It is in a bit of a state of affairs at present. There's some significant challenges, but yes, it's a big club, potentially a big club, and yes, we can make it work. It's going to need some further investment, and it's going to need a turnaround of the club's culture and everything about it. In truth, but over a period of time, yes, we can make it work." I have to say, all Paul's advisors were saying to him, "Don't do it. You know, there's a bit of risk involved, and there's a fair bit of capital as well, because the club had already run up a £5.5 million overdraft." So I always say that Paul and myself's partnership was based on my enthusiasm and his wealth and his acumen as well, and it's proved to be a very good partnership.
But that deal was done sort of in the springtime.
That deal was done right at the start of 1996, which was the start of Super League. Of course, at the time I was not only the owner but the chief executive and the head coach of Sheffield Eagles, about to start in our first season in Super League, first ever game in Paris, of course. So there's no way I could just come out of that that club at the time. So the deal was with the Leeds CFNA board that we will take over at the end of the season, at the end of the 1996, provided this story doesn't leak. If it leaks and it becomes public knowledge, then it's no deal. And that was the deal that Paul and myself had entered into. And I have to say, right until almost the very end, it did actually hold firm.
And of course, that season was a sort of annus horribilis for Leeds Rugby League. That 1990 season, they were flirting with relegation and everything else. As a interested bystander, were you having any second thoughts at that point?
No second thoughts, because I knew the potential of Leeds. I'd been here as a player in the late 70s and such. I know the potential of Leeds, and in particular Headingley. I knew there were significant challenges, but that was the challenge in many ways. So not having second thoughts, but it was a juggling act. And I remember coming to the last game of the 1996 season and having a walk around Headingley and through all the corporate areas. And the attendance on that day was 4,352. And Leeds had just escaped not getting relegated. I think Dean Bell came out of retirement and they beat Paris Saint-Germain at home to actually secure a crucial victory. So Leeds did survive, which was very important, of course, but in many ways that was the start of the job. And both the club and indeed the team were at a pretty low ebb. But in some respects, in taking over an organisation, that's the best place to take it over, because there's only one way to go. And even though it was a significant challenge, that we were full of enthusiasm and hope and expectation.
And you'd obviously have done your due diligence. You mentioned Paul's people were had go through the books and everything else. But when you arrived day one, what was your biggest challenge you knew you needed to resolve ASAP?
Well, day one for me was the press conference. This had actually leaked literally the last week, and I got a call from John Boyd, who was then the editor of BBC Radio Leeds. I was in New Zealand with the Great Britain touring party, was the assistant coach to Phil Larder. And John said, "Hey, a little bird tells me you might be involved in this Leeds takeover, Gary." Everybody was second guessing who it might be, and nobody knew. I don't normally tell lies, but there was no point saying to John, "Well, no comment, John, I'm not prepared to comment on that." I had to either say yes or no, and I was in New Zealand. So I said, "No, John, you're back in the wrong horse there." He said, "Well, I thought so, but he said, I'm just giving you a ring to find out." And I came home from the tour after we just lost the second test on that same day. I spoke to Phil Larder. I said, "Mate, I've got to be back in Leeds." And I spoke to Alf Davis, who was then the chief executive at Headingley, and we arranged a press conference for me getting home on that day. So I flew into Heathrow, I got a shuttle flight up to Leeds Bradford, I got a car to pick me up at Leeds Bradford, and that car brought me straight into Headingley, where I met Paul Caddick and we did the press conference.
Wow. And there's footage we can see of that press conference and going out on the pitch, and the headline on the scoreboard behind you, everyone's seen the picture, Headingley saved. It was as significant that when we see the glorious surroundings we've now got about us. The stadium, particularly our partnership with Yorkshire County Cricket, was under huge threat at that stage.
Well, Yorkshire County Cricket had also voted constitutionally to come out of Headingley and to go to what was going to be a new ground at Durka. I have to say, I think people like Margaret Ratcliffe and others in Headingley's home, they did a terrific campaign to sort of preserve Headingley, a public campaign that I wasn't involved in. And I think the city of Leeds wanted Headingley to be preserved, and so it should be, of course. And so Headingley was saved in that respect, and so was Leeds Rugby League. And so we set about the challenge of restoring both Headingley and indeed Leeds Rugby League, and that was the challenge ahead, really.
And as you mentioned, you took a time at a club where it was over £5 million in debt, so clearly the business side of things needed to stack up. The squad it was pre-salary cap times, and Leeds had overspent on what you mentioned, that crowd of 4,500, need to get more sponsors, more fans through the gate and everything else. How important was it to build that initial squad to be competitive on the field? Because you've got to solve all them problems, but you've got to have a team that can be competitive.
Absolutely, in sport you've got to have a team that can win. And that was important, and that was the biggest challenge was to change the culture. We needed to change the culture and actually promote the history and heritage of this place. It's got I've always believed Headingley is the spiritual home of rugby league, and we needed to promote that. We needed to become connected to the community. We needed to bring the community on board. And there are a lot of things that we needed to do. But primarily we had to have a team that could win. So we quickly assembled a fairly experienced team, a team that actually went to the first ever grand final in 1998 and ultimately won the Challenge Cup in 1999. So we actually got that side pretty right. But of course, in terms of building some lasting success, then the core has got to be, in my opinion, homegrown players with quality additions, and what I inherited when I came here was some really good, outstanding youngsters, people like Danny Maguire, Rob Burrow, Kevin Sinfield, Jamie Jones Buchanan, and others that were all potentially going to be very good players, and ultimately they all became very good players and become a very good team.
Yeah, I did a bit of research this week and worked out that of the 218 men's players who've debuted since your time at the club, so there was a group that were here beforehand, but the 218 that have debuted since your takeover in 1996, over 40% of those players have come through the academy. Some have gone on to have incredible careers for club and country. Others maybe play one or two games, but invariably go and play, either for another team, Super League, or play in the Championship. That must give you a great sense of pride, given that was one of your key goals originally.
Absolutely, that's what I want to do at any club that I was, but certainly at Leeds. And Leeds has got a rich history and heritage of producing players. It's got a great community rugby league base. So we wanted to take advantage of that. You always need to bring in world-class stars and players occasionally from other clubs, but the core needs to be homegrown players primarily. Kevin Sinfield wasn't homegrown, he came from Oldham, but he started his career here. He came through the ranks, he came through the academy, he came into the first team. In my eyes, he's a homegrown player. So that's the core of the club's future success. And even though it doesn't deliver instant results, because inevitably young players are not consistent, then it argued well for the future. And somebody like Daryl Powell did a terrific job coming in as head coach when he did. Underprepared in many respects, certainly not got the experience, didn't actually feel he was ready for the job. But he was so well respected by the players, and he'd got the core abilities to be able to do the job, and he did it extremely well, and actually laid a foundation for Tony Smith to come on. Tony was an excellent appointment as well, and he did a great job as well over his 4 years at the club.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Daryl there. He did a video for your last supper event we had a couple of weeks ago, and it was interesting. I thought in that you had to persuade him that he could be a head coach. Yeah. He doubted himself, but you persuaded him. You saw something in him that was going to be able to do that. Likewise, Brian McDermott, who we'd had an assistant coach, had cut his teeth down in London as a head coach, but originally thought he was coming back as an assistant to Brian McClellan. You put it to him that he could be head coach. Yeah. There was obviously something you see in those guys that they could do the job.
Absolutely, and that's what you're looking for with people, whether it's in business or whether it's in the team. You're wanting people who's got abilities, and they need to be encouraged and given an opportunity. So Daryl was the first player I signed for Sheffield Eagles when he was 18 years of age back in 1984. He was captain at 19, so he'd obviously got some special qualities and had special qualities as well. He was one of those players that when he was in a team, he never got dropped. You always valued what he can bring to a team, just like Kevin Sinfield. He's got so much to bring to the team other than his playing ability. So Daryl, for me, always was going to be a very good head coach, and of course he's turned out to be just that. And so were Brian McDermott. I helped Brian get the job at London because he needed to do a head coach's job, to understand what head coaching is all about, and he did a great job for them, and he was always destined to come back and ultimately be a head coach here at Leeds Rhinos. And Brian, I think, is the most successful coach in the history of the game, and still playing his trade but over in the NRL. So I think you're constantly looking for both players who've got abilities to and staff and coaches and managers.
And you mentioned about that homegrown, but the other side of that as well, you touched on there, was that sprinkle of stardust from overseas. Of course, your first signing as Leeds Rhinos Chief Executive was an overseas player, but he didn't realise he was signing for Leeds Rhinos. He thought he was signing for Sheffield Eagles.
That was Richie Blackmore. So when I went on tour with the Great Britain team in '96, which I think was the last tour, went to New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, and Fiji, I knew I was taking over at Leeds Rhinos at the end of the season, but nobody else did. I was head coach of Sheffield Eagles. And Richie Blackmore was destined to come to Leeds. Dean Bell wanted him to come to Leeds, but Dean Bell didn't know who was taking over Leeds. And I met up with Richie in New Zealand. And I said to him privately, and of course he thought I was Sheffield Eagles, and talked to him about coming to England, his aspirations, this, that, and all that. I said, Richie, just talking privately, given the choice, where would you want to go? He says, well, to be honest, Leeds is where I'd set my mind on going. He says, but if that's not to be possible, then I'd consider Sheffield or anywhere else for that matter. Well, of course, I didn't tell him at the time, but that was music to my ears in many respects. And then I arranged a follow-up meeting with him in the team hotel, and he didn't turn up, but he sent his wife. Now, his wife was quite a stunning, attractive lady. So she turned up unbeknownst to me to meet me at the team hotel. So I met her, and of course with a view to then go into my room, which is exactly where we went. And so I took her up to my room to talk about Richie, unbeknownst that there's a group of our players all sat around the corner. Well, they made their own assumptions, of course, quite clearly wrong, of course, but yeah.
There you go. It's a good job we didn't have social media in those days.
Absolutely.
Video there, Gary, you've been in a world full of trouble, particularly with Kath. In terms of your achievements here at the Rhinos, obviously the silverware and everything is phenomenal. It's the greatest period in the club's history in terms of success. We've had incredible transformation of the stadium. That's going to see the Ashes return here next week. And when you look at those pictures when you first arrived with the old North Stand, the crumbling boxes on the terrace of the Eastern Terrace, and the beloved South Stand that was in need of much love at that stage. That must also give you a great sense of pride.
It's absolutely. There's so much we've done and achieved off the field. The on-field success is in many ways is icing on the cake, and that's marvellous as well. But I think the rebrand to the Rhinos was significant. It wasn't popular at the time, but we felt that was the right way to go, and we went with that, and it's turned out to be a pretty good thing. I think the facility development, both Kirksall creating a rugby league centre of excellence, and in many ways we were ahead of all the other rivals in that regard. What's happened at Headingley is quite remarkable, and I think Headingley nowadays, compared to how it used to be, is transformational, and a great credit to Paul Caddick and the Caddick construction team that's actually done most of this work here, but up both Yorkshire cricket and what they've done with the cricket and on the cricket side of things. So Headingley is a world-class sports stadium. I think creating a 365-day-a-year business has been significant as well, because when I first came here, the club was only open on match days. And, we've now got a business that's got a conference and banqueting business, a retail business. We've got international students here. It's the home of Leeds Rhinos Foundation. And that's another significant achievement, connecting with the community and creating a foundation which is completely dedicated to delivering community support services and also promoting rugby league, both in schools, supporting community clubs. So the work of the Leeds Rhinos Foundation is significant. They're a great organisation, and they're certainly a great asset to Leeds Rhinos. So there's so many things that we've managed to do. I think just creating a brand and a reputation as well. We've always tried to lead in terms of the salary cap. We were the only big club to actually support a salary cap in rugby league, and I think I think creating a pathway for players through the academy, giving opportunity to young players as well. So I think there's been that much we've actually managed to achieve off the field, which has been quite significant and often gets forgotten about and overlooked in many respects.
Yeah, and I think that's the gift of your longevity here at the club, that you've seen that entire evolution of the sport in the last 30 years. And I think back to 30 years ago or 29 years ago when you first arrived, the landscape out in the public was very different in terms of Leeds City Council, rugby league development officers, PE in schools there was a lot more rugby league played in schools. The RFL had development officers as well that were doing out and things. And I think I remember when you first brought around the rugby league development plan, which has seen a real rebirth in recent times with Danny Maguire's appointment joining the team there. You recognised that as a club, if we don't do this, no one else will. If we don't put rugby balls into young kids' hands when they're 5, 6, 7 years of age, there will be no Danny Maguire's, Rob Burrows in 10, 15 years' time. And it's good to see other clubs following that lead. But I distinctly remember you could see what was going to happen in the future if the game itself didn't take control.
And that was the message. And I think there's a responsibility for all professional rugby league clubs in their community, in their city as we are, to actually take the lead. And that's what I said to all the interested parties. If we don't do it, it's not going to get done. And therefore, we're not going to do it on our own. We've got to actually coordinate all the various parties to and that's a source of great pride in many respects. But I think, you mentioned Leeds City Council, and I think developing a partnership with Leeds City Council, because they've been instrumental in terms of the stadium development. I think the work that originally Keith Wakefield, who was the leader of the council, Judith Blake, have all done to actually cement and grow that partnership. They've got a terrific partnership with the foundation. It's been quite instrumental, and it's been for our joint benefits as well. Headingley and Leeds Rugby League, Leeds Rhinos, is a significant part of the city. It's part of the city's assets. So whilst it doesn't cost the city any cash to actually deliver it, we're doing that job for them in many respects. But we actually are trying to make Leeds a bigger and better place to live and to be part of. And
I think a great example of that has got nothing to do with a rugby ball on the day when it happens, but it's all about Leeds Rhinos and what we've done as a club, and what one of our greatest ever players, Rob Burrow, was able to inspire in a city. If you think about the Rob Burrow Leeds Marathon, that didn't exist prior to Kev and Rob's drive to make it happen. But now, as a city, what a fantastic day of celebration that is, as people run into the city centre and then run out to Otley and come back. The roads are closed, the businesses are packed with people coming in and enjoying the day, the stadium's full of people, and that's got nothing to do with win or loss on a Friday night. But it's Leeds Rhinos and Leeds City Council and great partners and Run for All for that just, we're at the centre of the city.
I think the work we do in health and education as well is quite significant. You might argue that's nothing to do with rugby league. Well, it's part and parcel of what we're about. And, we run weekly dementia classes. The foundation does so much good work. It's all part of, I think, we have got so many privileges by being a high-profile sports club. And all sports clubs have. We've got to put back as well. We've got to actually utilise our facilities, our brand, our exposure to be able to create a benefit for the town or the city, and that's what I think we've done. I'm really pleased with the fact that we're hosting an Ashes test. After so many years, for Headingley to be back on the international test arena is terrific. Headingley used to host all the internationals, all the Challenge Cup finals, and that's, this is the only place where all the game's greatest players have played. Nowhere else in the world. And so it's such a significant part of Rugby League's history and heritage. So to be hosting an Ashes test, England versus Australia, is quite significant. And of course it's got global appeal as well. It's seen all over the world. And for Headingley to be back at the forefront, I'm really pleased and proud about that.
And I think that hasn't happened by accident as well. I think that's worth pointing out, because it's your vision and your leaderships that we've had over the years. We've had the other nationalities, or the All-Stars when it's been called that. We've had the French tests that we've said we'll host those. During the last World Cup, we had more games than any other of the men and women's venues with women's matches and men's matches here. We hosted the Samoa series, hosted the Tonga series. We've front and centre. We've put our hand up, and then you get an event like the Ashes comes back because we've proven that AMT Headingley Stadium is an international test venue for rugby league.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said a bit earlier, I think Headingley is the spiritual home of rugby league. It's 1895. It's when the first games were played here. It's one of only a handful of grounds that still remains where the game is still played here. So I think we've got all the history and heritage. And it's a fascinating stadium. Headingley is a wonderful place, and it's wonderful that we've got a great fan base and we've got a great corporate base, and it's a wonderful place to work as well. So one of my great privileges has been the people that actually work here. We've got more staff than anybody else, but everybody is committed and dedicated and do a great job, and it's made my job that much easier.
Interestingly, earlier in the year, Jamie Jones Buchanan sat down with Tony Smith on our Box 2 in partnership with Best Western GB Hotels, and he asked Tony about if he had any regrets from his time, and Tony regretted not being here longer than he was, that he took that Great Britain role, and actually he knew, reflecting on it, he was a day-to-day coach who loved being around lads, and actually the Great Britain coach wasn't wasn't really the type of role he had. So in that spirit, any regrets over the last 29 years for yourself? Anything you might have done differently?
I don't think I have. I mean, there's things there's been disappointments. Obviously, we played in 30 major finals, I think, in 29 years, so we didn't win them all. So they were disappointments. There will be times when we've been disappointed, but I don't. There's no regrets. And you mentioned the Tony Smith appointments. That was a fascinating one. Me and Daryl Powell, who was then the head coach, went to see Tony at his house and sat with him, which was a pretty strange experience for him, and for Daryl as well, I suppose, for that matter. But that was quite, in many ways, a unique appointment. I didn't know Tony Smith. I knew of him and done a bit of homework there, and he. So that was quite. I think we've always been prepared to do things that might have been out of the ordinary. Because if they're in the best interests of the club, then that's the criteria for me. Whether it's letting people go or bringing people in, is it in the best interest of the club? If it is, well, that's a good enough reason. So yeah, we've always been prepared to do something that might be seen to others to be unusual or a bit out of the box, really. There's quite a few examples of that. And
of course, anyone who's seen you wandering around the stadium during the week, I think you've always got your black pad in your hand and your red pen, which got a fair bit of mention on at your last supper the other week there, everyone referring to the red pen and corrections. And of course, in that list, I'll reveal a real bit of secret on here, Gary. In your pad, you used to have your squads for the next 3 years worked out who was going to go where, and your other one was, is he worth more money or more as a player? And if he became worth more as money, then you had to think about whether you were keeping it. You're always thinking 2 or 3 years ahead.
Absolutely, and I think I've acquired quite an undeserved reputation for being a bit careful with my money. It's not my money; it's the club's money. But I think I'm all for paying people what they're entitled to and what they're due to. Not overpaying, but rewarding and recognising people as they progress. That's important. But I think, you touched on the point, planning ahead. That's crucial. I think any chief exec in any organisation needs to be thinking about not only today, but tomorrow and indeed the next 5 years. And it's important to actually get your senior people thinking likewise as well. So you're constantly planning and so even though, we should have a pretty good idea what the Leeds Rhinos team is going to look like in 3 years' time, maybe even in 5 years' time. And that's not easy in professional sport, but I think that's where we got ahead of some clubs in terms of we were meticulously well planned, and the coaches were bought into that arrangement, even though they might not be the beneficiary in time to come. Somebody else would be. But I think my head coaches never really had they weren't time limited. Because they were needed to be encouraging them to be thinking ahead as well, and that's what they were. So I think one of our successes is the fact that we did plan pretty well. We planned for that generation of players, even though they weren't ready at the time, but they needed to be left to mature and to grow and to ultimately become the good team that they were.
Yeah, and you talk about that planning ahead and looking into the future. I think your appointment of Ian Blease to come in 18 months ago, and Ian's very much of the similar mould in terms of rewarding those players. We've seen this week, haven't we? Lockie Miller's agreed a new contract. Ash Hanley, one of our own, homegrown, a long-term contract, keeping him at the Rhinos to 2029 and rewarding he's become a great leader for the team and rewarding that success.
And those are what I call the core players. So the core players and indeed core staff need to be together and need to be focused on the future. I think one of the other great sources of pride is Team Rhinos, because when I first came here, we'd got the Leeds first team, and I think we'd got a Colts team. But now we've got not only I've got the Leeds Rhinos first team, we've got the reserves, we've got a thriving academy, we've got a scholarship, we've also got the women's Super League team, we've got the women's academy, we've got a wheelchair Super League team, we've got a physical and a learning disability rugby league team. So how inspirational it is to watch them guys. Rugby league's a tough enough game to play anyway, but when you actually play with a disability, then that's quite inspirational, really. We've also got a Leeds Rhinos netball Super League team, so we're giving opportunity for boys and girls, men and women throughout the city to participate. They might not necessarily become a professional player, but they're actually participating in sport, which is important. And I think sport can actually be a great vehicle for giving people engagement. It can be as a fan. I spend a fair bit of time with our fans who were really, they might be coming towards the end of their life, but they're really grateful for the involvement and the passion that being a Leeds Rhinos fan has given them. And that's quite rewarding for such as myself. And I think the same applies to a player, maybe a player in the community game. I'm a big advocate of women and girls rugby league and sport generally. So it's so inspirational to watch them develop. And even a sport like netball, which is not our sport, of course, but how that can get young people engaged. Running, dance, they're all critical parts of what we're all about.
Another key thing you talk about, people coming to the autumn of their years, shall we say, in a delicate way, the Players Association. I know when you first came in, that had sort of become a bit disjointed from the club, from the board, and how they were seeing themselves as separate, but you've forged those two parts together. And I think when I reflect on particularly Sid Hines and your relationship with Sid, and before he passed, how you always made sure he came over from Perth for reunions and things like that, and how Sid was, he knew how much he was loved here at Headingley. And even when he passed away, that you were instrumental in saying, that he didn't have a funeral over in Australia because that was his wishes, but we weren't going to let the moment pass without reflecting on Sid's life and having the memorial service here, and his friends and family that were in the UK could come and remember Sid in that way. And I think that, there's no, that's not something you see on necessarily as part of Sky Sports coverage of the game or anything like that, but it's a vital part and something you recognise. And now, I know you're going to continue in your role with the Players Association, but there's, the young bloods coming through there with Jamie Jones Buchanan and Barry McDermott. I won't include Maskey in that young blood element, but they're taking it on to the next generation.
The Leeds Rhinos Players Association is a terrific organisation that spans all decades of players. Originally, when I had a look at it, and it was just a group of very able old fellas who were actually representing their era at the time. I said, hey, what about the more younger generation? What about even players before your time? So now we actually cover all players that's played for Leeds Rugby League over the years. And it does a terrific job in raising funds and having social occasions. And it supports the Leeds Rhinos Foundation's Rugby League community programme. So it's a continuous circle, really. And it does a terrific job. And so I'm very proud to be a member of the Leeds Rhinos Players Association.
Yeah, and I know Phil Holmes and Paul Pickup do a tremendous job behind the scenes, keeping that all going as well. So, Gary, when you reflect on 29 years, what would be your overriding memories of that period to wrap things up?
Well, first of all, I've had a fascinating journey, so it's been terrific for me. And I've said on several occasions, I can never give back to the game what the game's given me as a fan, as a player, as a manager, and whatever. So I'm really grateful and really delighted that I come on board at Leeds back in '96. So I've had a fascinating journey. My dad's no longer alive, but what he'd have probably said if you'd have asked him the same question is he's not done so bad for a cast lad. And that's probably a fair fitting tribute, actually. And
just looking ahead to the future, obviously the Broncos didn't get in this round into Super League, but the ambitious plans. Anyone who was down at Wembley last weekend will have seen London Broncos everywhere around Wembley Stadium. Darren Lockyer obviously delivered the match ball, the new ownership there at the Broncos. Is that something that's got you excited? And I know when you were on here last time, I asked you about the Broncos and you were talking about all the things that needed to be done in terms of community and things like that. And I put it to them, maybe would they not be ready this time around? You were confident they would be. Yeah. But next time around, looking at the signings, and Danny Ward's gone back there this week, a fantastic appointment for the Broncos. I'm presuming you're confident the future is big for London.
It's a huge project. I've always been a supporter of rugby league in London and the South, and indeed outside of the games heartland. So it's a huge project. There's that much to be done. But that's the opportunity and that's the challenge. And that's what I'm up for. And I'm ready to embrace it full on. Bringing Darren Lockyer on board and Grant Wedgell has been quite significant as well. It's a project that's going to need funding. And it's going to need the participation of all the stakeholders of the game, the RFL, rugby league commercials, etc. But it's a terrific project. Rugby league is alive and kicking in London, but we need to make it less of a secret and a much more high-profile sport, which will be for the benefit of the entire game.
Well, you've certainly got the runs on the board, Gary, in terms of turning small acorns into giant oaks, as we've seen here at the Rhinos. On behalf of everyone connected with Leeds Rhinos, a huge thank you to you for what you've done for the last 29 years. Enjoy today, your final day in position. I know you've been a great mentor for Jamie Jones-Buchanan as well over his entire career, but particularly over the last few months as he gets ready to take up the reins and take us on to even brighter future as well in the coming years. So thank you, Gary. Thank you for joining us here on the Leeds Rhinos podcast. Do keep in touch with everything we do here at the Rhinos. Remember to subscribe and press that notification button so you get told as soon as new content drops. We've got a couple of big things coming up in the next few weeks ahead of the start of pre-season, and then once the lads are back in, we'll take you behind the scenes and give you insight into all the work that's going on that Brad and the guys are doing with the team to get us ready for 2026. We had some great news this week. Lockie and Ash have signed. We've got some new signings in the pipeline. Please be patient with us. It's maybe not as simple as some journalists make out in terms of signing players. A lot of paperwork that needs to be gone through, but as soon as we're able to let you know about those, we will do. There's some exciting times coming up in 2026. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Just signing off, just a big thank you to Gary and thank you for joining us here on the Leeds Rhinos podcast.